Eh, Thank you. We have help from Amitzur, who's now the Shaliach in Yetebori, is helping us here with the administration. Thank you so much for your assistance. And you're welcome to say hello to everyone. Nu Shaliach.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see and meet you all.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. And tonight we will be continuing with the Pirkei Avot. I hope we didn't scare everyone off in the last 2 weeks because we had Mishnayot that were discussing the skull of a head that was floating on the water. And then we were talking about worms in the flesh. So if you're still here with us, then you have a good stomach for Mishnayot. And we will continue, but we won't have any living or dead animals in this, or people in this in the Mishnah that we will learn today. And Rav Shmuel and I will share the learning this evening. So welcome everyone. And before we get into the Mishnah, I'd like to take us back to the historical perspective of the time that the Mishnah, even though it's been mentioned before during the as we've been learning the Pirkei Avot, this Mishnah that we're going to see, sort of, we've been jumping a bit back and forth, and we're going now to backwards to Hillel. We jumped to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, as you remember, to the 3rd century. Now we're jumping back to the end of the destruction of the temple, and maybe we'll have a short discussion about that. But the importance, or the historical importance, which also has its relevance today, as we always try to learn from history, is that at the turn, you can say, of a new historical era that is dawning on the Jewish people, is when for the first time they are setting the foundations and the fundamentals of how to survive as a diaspora. They knew from the very beginning, the prophets told them that the first exile, the Babylonian exile, would be 70 years. And the story that we're going to be celebrating just around the corner next week of Purim is just at the end of those 70 years of the Babylonian exile, just before they go back to the second temple. So if I already got you confused, just to go back, basically we have the first temple, and then we have the exile, the Babylonian exile, which was 70 years. And at that point, they knew that it would be a limited exile. And part of the story of Purim, according to some of the Midrashim, is connected to this, that the part of the joyous feast of Achashverosh at the beginning was to the fact that the Jewish people were still in exile, and there had actually been a miscalculation of the years. Without getting into those details, the point is that when the second temple came around, there were no prophets to tell them how long the exile would be. And perhaps if they had, that was a good thing, because if they told them that it would be 2,000 years, they would have been pretty distraught. So in that sense, when the second temple is destroyed, then the leading sages at the time realized, and even as the destruction is happening, the sages are asking themselves, how are we going to survive without a spiritual center? And the obvious answer to that is by saying that our spiritual center will now be the Torah. We had the Beit HaMikdash, we had the temple, we don't anymore. We will establish prayers that will leave that as a spiritual center for ourselves, but without the Torah, we're not going to manage in the diaspora. We're going to they saw what had happened to the previous cultures. They saw what had happened even in the Holy Land to the 7 nations, including the Philistine, the Palestinians of the time, and the sea-wearers that just disappeared into the culture. And the Romans, first the Greeks, the Hellenistics, and then the Romans were very good about doing that. So I think that background is very important for the sage that we're going to meet in the Mishnah today. And Rav Shmuel, you're very welcome to intervene at any point, of course. I'm not holding the only microphone here. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who we will soon see in the Mishnah, becomes the major rabbinical figure who is credited for saving the Jewish world, basically, for having the vision of what needs to be done. And part of that vision was also during the time of, we know that also historically, during the end period of the Second Temple, two things were happening parallel to one another. One was that those who are doing the official tasks, such as the Kohanim in the temple, many of them were involved politically, received political titles rather than spiritual ones. There was a lot of, you can say, both political and also economical pressure involved in the and power struggles within the Second Temple. And parallel to that, we know that many of the purists who were very fed up with that left and created sects within Judaism, some of them going down to the Dead Sea, which is where we have the Qumran scrolls and the Dead Sea scrolls from that period, in which people are saying these are the days of darkness, and they're the sons of dark and the sons of light. Those are the words that are used in some of the Megillot and the scrolls in the Dead Sea. So they were seeing a very dark vision of Am Yisrael, of the people of Israel being split into two. Everyone was sure that they were holding the truth, and they couldn't find the path in the middle to mediate in between. Many of them were very zealous, including those who were the students of Shammai. Shammai, as we have learned before in the previous Mishnah, was a person of truth and being strict about the truth. So these people were a part of the rebellion against the Roman Empire, and many of them were killed in action. They were killed during as active rebels against the Romans, and it became a huge question which split the Jewish world. In other words, what do we do? Do we give up on our identity? Do we make a peace treaty with the Romans who wish to overtake us? How do we survive? And that balance was a very difficult one to find. And as I said before, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was credited, he was a Talmid of Hillel. He was a student of Hillel that we have learned a lot of already, which is a way of peace and of mediating and of finding a path forward. And he was, first of all, credited for finding a solution and even speaking with the Romans. First, the Roman commander, who then became the Roman emperor at the time, and finding a way to save the Jewish heritage, and but not give in his own identity. So he was in between. He was the one who was able to find a proper balance. And then when we will learn in the Mishnah today, when we learn about his students, so the question is, what qualities do you need in order to continue on and manage to create a backbone for the Jews in exile, and even in their own land in exile? Because once the Romans destroy the temple, you have no center. So in that sense, that is the beginning of the galut, the exile. Jewish people continued continuously to live in the land. That notion of everyone was sent out is not true. We know that the Mishnah and then the Talmud and then the Jerusalem Talmud, or what is called the Palestinian Talmud in the academic world, continues on into later sages who are living in the Holy Land. So there was a continuous Jewish presence in the Holy Land as the center went over and changed into Babylon. But at the same time, this was exile. This was no longer feeling that you have a center as a home for Hashem. You don't have the Beit HaMikdash. Well, Shmuel, if you want to, before we get into the Mishnah, if you have any comment on this challenge that they were facing and maybe some of its relevance today as well.
Yes, well, I think that, thank you very much for the historical background and understanding of these people here whose names we so often mention when studying Talmud, and very often even people who are very, very knowledgeable of Talmud do not always have so much knowledge about who these people actually were. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, I think the power of compromise and is really interesting. I think it's a very Jewish trait, sort of like a rational perspective in a way. There's like the heated argument that we have to fight the Romans, like a very extreme nationalistic perspective, which some groups had, and then some want to assimilate. In a way, you see a very like practical perspective that, this seems to be what God has decreed upon us. The temple is going to be destroyed. Let's try to save what we can. So I think this is something that you see quite often in Jewish history and in the wisdom of the Chachamim. On the one hand, a very, very strong attachment to our values and what we believe in. At the same time, trying to manage with the political reality that exists. There's a very interesting thing, because the Tanakh and the Talmud are full of miracles, full of them, miracle after miracle. And our Jewish history is full of miracles. And next week we're going to celebrate Purim, which is all about a miracle. But at the same time, Talmud says, "En somchim al hanes." You're not meant to rely on it. So I think this is a very, very interesting perspective of the Chachamim, that you have to be realistic and live according to the facts that are on the ground.
I think that there is a message in the fact that they credit Rabbi Yochanan with so much, because at the time there were other stages, but the fact that so much focus is put on him is because at this crucial juncture he did the right thing, and he risked perhaps his own life in two ways. First of all, the action that he did was he went out to the Roman emperor to try to create a peace, a pact that a spiritual center would be set up for the first, you can say, the Beit Midrash or a yeshiva, which would replace the Beit Mikdash in a way. But also, so he risked his own credibility, or perhaps even his own life, if the zealous of Jerusalem had found him. And on the other hand, there's even one story that they even almost stabbed him, during when he leaves in order to create this peace pact. And on the other hand, the fact that he's willing, so he's risking himself on both ends, because he wasn't invited by the Romans to do that. But I think what is leading him is the words of Hillel, which we learned, which is to be a rodef shalom, to be a person who looks for a path forward for peace. And many times the word, we can have a long discussion about this, but the word shalom doesn't mean I give up on what I believe on. Many people think that, you're giving in order to, there's a compromise in order to have peace. Whereas what he's doing is actually strengthening their identity by looking at reality in the eyes. And I think that's a very different notion. But at the time, it could be that you're considered a betrayer, because what are you doing here? So in retrospect, maybe, the sages say, look at that moment. It wasn't a clear moment for him, but what he did was the right thing at the time, going and going forward. And without getting into any politics, I don't want to in the shiur, but I think we hear a lot of voices from Israel today in terms of what is right, what is wrong. There's a lot of anger more than anything else. And I wish there was a Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that would just say, it's not about what is, we are, Am Yisrael needs this voice of saying, how do we keep it together? How do we continue? How do we create a place that we can all feel at home stepping forward from here into the future? Without getting into a long conversation, but it's conversations that hopefully will have a Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because you see how much anguish it is when you have two groups, maybe similar in a sense, that everyone feels that they're being betrayed, or that they're not being represented, or that their truth is, if they don't get their truth, then everything will fall apart. days of darkness and days of light, or as Bnei Ha'or, Bnei sons of darkness and sons of light, as they were called in the Megillah. But maybe we can go forward to the Mishnah itself. Elitzor, just if you can turn me into a co-host, that would be great, and then I can share. If you're still with us. Shmuel, are you a host, perhaps?
I turned you into a co-host.
Thank you so much. Great, thank you. So now, after this introduction, maybe we can have a look at the Mishna of Shmuel, if you want to start.
So Rabbi Ben Zakkai received the oral tradition from Hillel and Shammai. So previous leaders of the Sanhedrin were Hillel and Shammai, then comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He used to say, if you have learned much Torah, do not claim credit for yourself, because for such a purpose where you were created. Now, I was looking at the commentaries on this. This is, again, it's very important to realize who is talking here. This is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Say he was completely fluent in all the areas of the Torah in the most amazing way. So there was a lot to be proud about. And he says this sentence here, like, you were created for this. And obviously it's a sign of great humility. We already know that great Jewish men were extremely humble. Moses was known as the humblest of all men. But I think there's something deeper here than just humility. There's the idea that wisdom or skills, they're not something necessarily to just boast with or be proud about. You're given something to be used for the right purpose. So if you were given a lot of wisdom and a lot of ability to study Torah at a very high level, then that is what Hashem wants from you. And then if you end up using it for the study of Torah, that's not an extra nice thing you're doing. That is the purpose. And if you did not do that, you did not use that power to become a great Torah scholar, you would be doing something wrong. And this is I think it's a very strong Jewish concept. We have it also by wealth, for example. Somebody's very rich, like in the outside world, often you have the idea, okay, so he gave to charity, he's a nice guy, he's done an extra nice thing. But a Jewish perspective is that, well, if Hashem gave him a lot, then that is because Hashem wants him to give and expects him to give, and if it'd be wrong if he didn't. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Richard, of it. I think it's a deep sentence.
I think that it's a as some of the commentaries mentioned, it's a unique thing to say this is for the purpose that you were created. In other words, you could say many things, because you owe it to you, but to say that this is the purpose that you were created takes it, as you're saying, I think, to a deep level in which we're saying what is the existential feeling that one feels when you are living. And if everything that you do, you feel that you take as a favor for yourself because I have accomplished it, then you yourself will not feel the need naturally to pass it on to someone else. And also very naturally, I think you'll end up in a situation in which power that you receive, as one of the commentaries said, the Mishna Eretz Yisrael, a modern commentary, he says that if you don't follow this, then you will end up taking power into your hands because you have accomplished such and such, and therefore the natural thing will be to do so. Whereas if you have learned Torah in a proper way, in other words, you spend your entire days learning and realizing how deep the Torah is, then naturally, I think it's saying here, you will not end up saying, this is what I have accomplished. You won't take credit for yourself. And therefore will lead naturally to the humility that it says here, that you realize as a humble person, I'm just doing what I'm using the talents that Hashem gave to me when he created me. So I would say on the opposite end also, if you find yourself in a situation in which you feel that you're taking credit for things in life, and that you feel that, that I have accomplished this and they haven't, so it's their problem, or you feel empowered and misusing or abusing power in that way, then maybe you haven't properly learned Torah lishma. I'm just turning the sentence away, that you haven't learned, the learning of your Torah has not been done in humility.
Very interesting. So in a way, you're saying that this do not claim credit for yourself is also like saying you will not. If your Torah study was proper in the right way, then it will not lead to you taking credit for yourself. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And also it's sort of a self-check for one. We're talking about someone who's learned a lot, right? It's no question. If you haven't learned Torah and you haven't spent the hours, then this is not. But he's talking within the Beit Midrash. He's talking to his own, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's talking to his own Talmidim, and as we said, he's setting the foundations for how they will succeed to be proper leaders. And he's telling them that proper leadership is not one in which you take credit for yourself. And if you've done something, it's better, and you've done something in a proper way, then don't take credit for it. Give a credit to someone else. And in that way, you can be empowering someone else, and you can also be making sure that you remember where you received. So I agree with you. This is a lot about a sense of humility at the end of the day, but also leadership. In other words, you can sit in a corner and not take any power, not take a stance, not be a leader, and say that someone else will do that for me. But that's not what we're hearing here. What he's actually saying is, no, you should be a leader, but make sure that you remember to constantly sort of remind yourself that this is what you were created for.
Very good. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples, and they were these: Rabbi Eliezer ben Hulkanus, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, Rabbi Yossi HaCohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Okay, so just for now, it's just a list. Hu haya moneh shivcha. He used to list their outstanding virtues. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hulkanus is plastered cistern, which loses not a drop. So it's, I think a cistern, maybe some sort of well, but you plaster it, so no water is going to drop out through the walls or anything. It's going to be everything that you teach him, basically, he remembers. Everything you teach gets saved on the hard drive, so to say.
It's just to note or question, why would we use this idea of a plastered cistern rather than saying a glass bowl that doesn't lose a drop, or to say a metal bowl or something like that? In other words, do you have an idea of Shmuel, why would you say a plastered cistern, which naturally does lose, but now it's being covered in a sense?
That's a good point. Didn't think about it. What could it mean? A בור סוד שאינו מאבד טיפה. Yeah, it's a good question. That means maybe the human brain is naturally prone to forgetting, and maybe you need to work to get to such a level that you don't forget things. I don't know.
Also, as always, I'll bring in the archaeological and historical perspective. So they're living, many of them are living at this time in areas, for example, in the desert, at least at the beginning, they were still in the area of Judea. And in the area of Judea, you don't have a natural, the sand and the pits that are there, the water, do not keep the water. Whereas you have in the Galilee, for example, you have where they ended up just a bit after this, then you have more hard rock, which will maybe naturally keep the rainwater, for example. But their natural surroundings is one in which you have this very fine sand or like a cistern, like it's saying, and you actually have to cover it. It's very interesting if you travel to Judea to archaeological sites, then you will see quite clearly till this day, you will see the plastered cistern. You can see where water was kept by this plaster, which exists until this day. Just 5 minutes from our home, we have Herod's palace, and it's full of this plastered cistern. But that's just a historical perspective, that this is what they're using as a parable. But I agree with you, it's something you have to go to an extra effort in order to cover it, to make sure that you don't lose it. It doesn't happen by itself. I think we had someone who raised their hand here. If you have anything to say, please do so. Yes, David, you wanted to say something? You're on mute.
Yes.
Yes. What is a cluster system? What does it mean?
It means, like, if you have for example, clay or sand, and you wanted to keep the water in throughout the winter, then you will plaster it over so that it doesn't lose, so that it will keep the water.
Plaster it with water.
With water.
No, you will plaster it with a special plaster that they used at the time, which was a technique that they knew from, which was used by the Romans. So it was used in order to that in the desert, the water will not seep to the ground, that it will be able to keep it.
Mm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Shmuel, weiter, בבקשה.
אוקיי. בואו עושה שם טיפה. רבי יהושע בן חנניה, אשרי יולדתו. Happy is the woman that gave birth to him. Yeah, so this was actually quite interesting. When I read this many times, I've gone through the Pirkei Avot, I always just thought it was a nice line to say, that he was such a great boy, such a good man, that happy is the mother who had such a special son. But there seems to be more to it. I saw the commentaries mentioned that the mother already was asking for blessings for her son. It seems to be the mother herself prayed, or it was very important for her to have a son who would be great in Torah. There's also the idea, some commentaries make the connection between this line and another line, which is brought very often in the Torah, that in the Talmud, that a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, should behave in a way which brings honor to the Torah. So the people will say, Ashrei, Ashrei Aviv shelimdo Torah. Happy is the one who taught him Torah. It says, for example, his business dealings have to be clean, without any trickery. His clothes should be clean. The way he speaks to other people, to his wife, to his children, should be soft. Whatever. There is an idea that the Talmid Chacham, it has to shine out his behavior. And if it doesn't, if he behaves in a bad way, he brings people will criticize the Torah itself. So some commentators make the connection here, like maybe not just that he was a great Torah scholar, but like all his behavior was like better and was good and was bringing honor to his mother, to his family, to the Torah. So that's maybe a perspective. I don't know. How did you understand these words?
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, how many times have we gone to an academic lecture and left, the university, and you leave the class, you can say, what a wise person, what a fantastic, knowledge this person has. But I don't remember, at least for myself, in the sense that even just a simple term, you can say, what a mensch, right? In other words, if someone is not only giving over knowledge, but is giving over something deeper than that, then it will cause an admiration within yourself to feel to really feel a light, I think, to be, shine by this person, that you feel in this person's presence something amazing. And that reflects back to the person, even to that person's mother. In other words, this is something really that it's almost tangible, that you can feel something really, really special from this person. So when you leave, you say, and what an amazing person. It really causes both admiration and maybe something that you would like to copy itself. I think that word ashrei is very unique, as you say, because it's bringing in, it's not just saying, what a great lesson we just had, rather to a sense of deep admiration, of gratitude, of something which makes you feel very special.
Okay. Rabbi Yossi HaCohen, Chassid. We've had the word Chassid before. Pious, it's translated in English. And I think I've mentioned it before in Pirkei Avot. The usual way the commentaries explain the word Chassid is that somebody who always tries to do the best, serve Hashem in the best way, not just keep the mitzvot, not just being a tzaddik, but actually to look for the best way to do it. Like I said, it's connected to kindness, but the idea of looking always for opportunities to serve God, to keep the Torah.
I'm just thinking, as we're learning here, it's very interesting that we sort of that we changed, the way of description, because until now in Pirkei Avot, we've been saying Hu haya omer, right? We were saying this is what he used to say, and we were trying to understand that what is this person's message for life through what he has been saying. Here we have the person who is the teacher, who he is saying himself, this is what is unique about each of these students. And then it's really, it's a different way of looking at things, but it's also seeing the responsibility that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai feels, because he's looking at each of his students, and he had hundreds of them, but these were the 5 main disciples, and he's saying, this is what is unique about them that really, will allow, and maybe, as we're going to soon see, but each of these is a different way. It's even difficult to compare the 3 that we have seen so far, because one is about knowledge, one is about maybe perhaps like midot, how one acts and what you feel. And Rabbi Yossi HaCohen is being very strict. The Chassid is being very strict in the way he acts towards himself, to be very careful in everything that he does. So I think we really see 3 different, so far, we see 3 different, very different characteristics that are being described about each of these.
Good. Then we have Rabbi Shimon ben Netanyahu, Yereh Chet, the one that fears sin. I thought this is a nice, it's an expression that needs a bit of explanation, because I think nowadays fear is often not a word we like to use. Fear connects to, I don't know, to depression, to phobia, to paranoia, to mental. I don't know. It's not something we like to praise, but in the Talmud, Yereh Chet, a sin person's afraid of sin, or Yereh Shamayim, a God-fearing person. These are very, very nice words of praise you can say about a person. And the idea of Yirat Chet, or being fearing sin, the idea is that it's not enough to just say, I'm a good person, I do what's right. Because we all make mistakes, we're human. And you have to be Yereh Chet, you have to be afraid, you have to be careful not to fall into the pit of sin. And that's what the Yereh Chet is. Somebody who's like careful, and he pays attention to his actions to see, are his actions good? And can he somehow improve them? I see there's a hand that's been lifted here. David.
Yes, it's me again. This word, fear, in Swedish, there is a special word for fear in this way. It's frukta. And it's not the same connotation that fear. It means be somebody who is not afraid, but is not adoring, but is respectful to the other one.
Yes, I
Respectful
think
to the sin, for example. It's not
yes, perhaps the word in English could be like to be in awe.
It's being afraid, but in Swedish there is the frukta. For example, you say you should fear Hashem, and it's not the same thing as be afraid of.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask everyone here an open question. Is there something that you feel that it is good for you to be afraid of? Because as Shmuel was saying today, we're a bit afraid of the word afraid, but do you feel, first of all, it's an open question to everyone here, do you feel that that there's something that is good to be fearful of? And in what way? I'd be very happy to hear if anyone would like to share.
The fear is something which is very important in a way, because the fear shows that you are not so, how can I say, you are not so omnipotent, megalomany. The fear has to do with the respect of the limits. But of course, too much fear is very, very, very dangerous because you become paranoid. And I mean, it's very, very related to how, related in a way. I think it's a very difficult word, because fear is something which is important. A person who has not feeling of to be fear or to be afraid means that there is no limits. But of course, too much fear can lead to paranoia.
Yes, yes. And thank you so much. Anyone else want to share?
When I'm thinking of fear, I think I translate it to Swedish more as a respect and humble. You're not afraid. That's a big difference, I think.
But to be afraid, thank you, Cecilia. But then just to use the Mishnah's word, what does it mean in that sense to be fear of sin? Fearful of sin.
You are observing and trying not to sin, so you have respect how to follow to be a mensch.
Mm-hmm.
To try to go do the best thing you can.
Okay, thank you. And we have in the chat David, who tells us, Daniel Sevu, sorry, says, I don't think any fear is good, because it maybe just, in other words, why is it good? In other words, if we're talking about sin, is having any fear good? And then, as we've heard here, there's different translations and a very different meaning and understanding. Let's just, if anyone else wants to comment before we can gather these thoughts together. Michael, you haven't said anything. Michael and Eva, you usually have something to say.
No, I think the same, that it's not to be afraid, like really afraid, but in a respectful way. That it's a good kind of being afraid. It's the same that, like she said, that you put limits to yourself, and I don't have a other way to explain it.
Okay, thank you. I just put you on the spot. Anyone else want to share your views on fearing sin? Well, the word sin is also, we've mentioned it before, but Daniel Cyril, please.
Yes, shalom, everybody. What is the name of this psychologist which was in the ghetto in Auschwitz? What was his name? I just forget it. He used to say, he used to say that the fear of something, just in practical even, it will unconsciously take us to the thing we fear. I mean, if I'm thinking I'm going to fall in the street and I'm going too much worry and in fear, obsessive unconscious fear of falling, I will probably be falling. And he's very religious and he's a believer as well. So the thing is that when you love God, when you absorb God on the goodness of the kindness of it, your relation goes over the fear. The fear just paralyzes human beings and is irrational and unconscious. So we have the risk of falling into the thing we are fearing because we are obsessively fearing.
Yes.
So that's a human psychology. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Paulina.
I was just thinking, as this is in the context of people that are very much involved in the halakha and the law, that the fear of sin is connected to fear of breaking the commandments, the mitzvahs that we have taken on ourselves as Jews. That was just my thought.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this fantastic input. I just have a funny, vision right now, hearing all of these thoughts on fear. If you remember in the, I'm sure everyone here has seen Shrek. Oh, Shmuel, have you seen Shrek, the movie? No. Okay. So anyway, you have this donkey that's crossing this, very steep, and they have to cross for they're running for their lives, and this donkey is crossing this very narrow bridge, and Shrek, who's not afraid of anything, just says to the donkey, "Don't look down." And then, of course, what is the first thing that he does is he looks down, and then he gets a heart attack from looking down. In other words, there's a balance between the fact that if you're at the edge of a cliff, it would be stupid not to be afraid of heights. Being afraid of heights, using the word fear, saves our lives. If we're not afraid of anything, then we could get into both physically, we could get into danger, but also spiritually. If you just think everything is okay, and you can manage to deal with everything in life, both psychologically, spiritually, and you don't know your own limitations, as we heard here, then that I think is problematic. On the other hand, when we talk about spirituality, the word sin means that sin is the word chet. Also, the literal translation of chet means to stray off the path. It's missing the mark. You can say lehachti et hamatara, is to miss the mark. So, in other words, if you're not afraid to walk off the path, then you're not going to notice the path itself. So but I also agree with almost everything said here. Shmuel, I'm going to allow you to comment as well. But I think that over fear, in other words, if I'm just over focused all of the time on the fear that I might do something wrong, then I'm not going to do something right either. I'm never going to do anything if I'm just afraid, even about, chata'im, about doing the wrong thing, that I won't do anything at all. I can sit on Shabbat and not move from my couch because I'm so afraid that I might do something wrong. Or, but we have the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat. We have the mitzvah of having the pleasure of Shabbat, which means, no, you have to do something. You have to cut up a salad and you have to learn to cut it right. Don't be afraid to do so because you don't know, but also be aware that, yes, you have the 39 melachot of Shabbat. So in that sense, there's a constant pull and tug, I think, between also what we're hearing from the different people here in the room.
Yeah. Okay, I think, can I speak?
Yes,
No.
yes.
Okay, I think when you say the last words, then I better understand the word fear in this context this evening, because I think it goes to the positive direction and the negative direction. And it's important both thinking, and it's a very bright word. No, not bright, but it's big. It's a big word. It's very big word to use. So so you can use it different ways, I think.
Yes,
Positive
yes,
and negative a little
yes,
bit
exactly,
on the
exactly. And
side.
yes, and as we heard from the different people here, if you over-focus in a negative way, then that's not good. But if you just think it's a free-for-all in life and you don't have the limitations, it's like getting in a car, then yes, you have a limit. And if you don't follow the limit, you're going to get in a car crash and hurt yourself and hurt others. So you have to understand, what your limitations are in terms of your own level of spirituality, in terms of your own understanding, and also in terms of your own connection to Hashem, I would say, even where you are, and to be conscious of that you are at the edge of a cliff, in a sense. But we do have a few more. I'm very glad we got stuck on this word, Yerechet, and we had this fantastic discussion. But we have a bit more of the Mishnah to go through. Rav Shmuel, so you're welcome to continue.
Okay, ורבי אלעזר בן ערך, מעיין המתגבר. He is like a spring that ever gathers force. So again, this is something I've read many times in Pirkei Avot, not paid too much attention to it. Thought, okay, so he was full of Torah and he was very clever. But actually, there's quite a lot going on here, because what is a spring that ever gathers force? And the commentaries about Inura, they explain that actually, in a way, there's not just passing on the Torah. Otherwise, it would just be a river, right? You pass on the Torah from your teacher, and then you pass it on to your students. It should be a river that flows steadily. The idea of more and more and more water coming the whole time is referring to the idea of like hidushim, of new ideas. And it's always like it's always an interesting thing to talk about, because on the one hand, we put so much stress on the fact there's only one Torah. It's always been the same Torah. It's a Torah Hashem gave to Moshe. At the same time, new situations arise, and you need a Talmid Chacham to bring out the wisdom of the Torah and apply it to this situation. Every student can use his mind and see the Torah from a different perspective and come to chidushim, come to novel ideas. That's why there's so many Jewish books around. In every generation, more books of Torah are written, and the people see things in the Torah and realize deeper meanings in it. So it seems to be this was the greatness of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, this sort of novel, this capability of coming up with novel interpretations and explanations.
Yeah, Shmuel, you're gonna have to excuse me again for bringing in the Judean desert which this is happening. In other words, there's a big difference between a bore is something which collects rainwater. If you live in a desert, then you have a well which is collecting the water and preserving the water, and then if you have it plastered, then you're not losing anything. A ma'ayan is a spring is connected to the aquifer. In other words, it's drawing water from inside a deeper place in the earth, and you will find that you have springs that dry out. Why do they dry out? They dry out because it's very different than the first case. The well will dry out when you're out of water. In other words, you haven't preserved the water, or you've used it up. By the end of the summer, the wells are empty. Whereas the only reason that a spring will dry up is because it's not connected properly to the source. In other words, if it's lost its veins that are connected to the deeper aquifer of the water, where the water is preserved, then that's when it dries up. So that just description connects to what you were saying. The idea of having a new Sfarim or Chidushim all of the time, renewing the Torah, is like all of the time making sure that the veins are running constantly. So I just had to connect it back to where they were actually giving us this Torah from.
Very, very nice. Okay. And then there's a bit of mathematics here. הוא היה אומר, אם יוכל חכמי ישראל בכף מאזניים, ואליעזר בן הורקנוס בכף שנייה, מכריע את כולם. Yes, so he says, Rabbi Yochanan would say, compare his students, if all the sages of Israel on one scale of the balance, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus on the other scale, he would outweigh them all. Okay, so first, he says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, who he was what was his specialty? Can we just go up a bit? He was this genius who kept all the Torah in his head and didn't even lose a drop of it. So he was so great, he said you could put all the wise men together and he would be greater. Put them on the scale, he's greater than all of them together. Okay. Abba Shaul Omer Mishmo, Abba Shaul said in the name, seems to be agreed in the name of Yochanan, if all the sages of Israel were on the one scale of the balance, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus was also with them, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach on the other scale, he would outweigh them. So it's an interesting thing. I always understood it when I read this before. It wasn't an argument here that maybe Abba Shaul had a different version of what Rabbi Yochanan had said. That it was really Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus was greater, or Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was greater, and who had greater knowledge. But studying this today and looking at the commentaries, and also in the text itself, it seems to be that this is all Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was talking. And then Abba Shaul said a different idea also in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So it could be that it's not an argument, but it depends from what perspective you're looking at things. To be Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, to be the well that never loses a drop, is an amazing, amazing thing, and could be in that area of knowledge of Torah. He was the greatest, and no one else could compare to him, and perhaps even all the rabbis together could not compare to him. But then you have Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who is the Mayan, who's always coming with new ideas, with new interpretation, with new understanding, which requires a very deep analysis. Perhaps in that sense, he was greater than Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus. And it's not really, and this is actually an idea we find often in the Talmud. There is an expression we say, Sinai ve'oker harim. We compare the Sinai, some Chachamim, where there was somebody who's known as Sinai, the one who had lots and lots and lots of Torah knowledge that he memorized. And there was another one who had a lot of very deep powers of analysis and understanding. So we find this argument often in the Talmud, which one is greater? And perhaps it doesn't need to be seen as an argument, because we really need both of them. You need a lot of knowledge, because otherwise your theories won't stand. You know, any one piece of knowledge can destroy that you missed. You've lost the whole theory. On the other hand, if you never go deeper in analysis, you'll never be able to apply the knowledge of Torah to anything tangible.
Why does it need to be competitive? In other words, do we need our students to be competitive in order to say one is greater than the other? Why do you feel the Mishnah has to? I mean, we're talking about all of these great characteristics and learning from each of these, and each of these is, beautiful in a different way. So why suddenly do we have to throw them all onto one scale and the other one on another?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. This idea of who is greater, and why is it important? Why is it important who is greater? We have it also, actually, the Talmud says this about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai himself. Very interesting Gemara that tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the lowest of all the students. in the times of before the temple, and the wisest was Yochanan ben Uziel. And the Talmud is sort of trying to show how great the wisdom was in those days, because Yochanan Zakkai was so to say the lowest of all the students, but he was still a complete genius compared to the later generations. But yeah, there is an idea of competition in the Talmud. It's brought down at Kinat Sofrim Tarbe Chochma. The idea that if there is a competition, even jealousy in a way, between the wise, that makes the wisdom grow greater, and that encourages more study because everybody wants to know more than the other, and that encourages study, sort of like a bit like Adam Smith and economics. But I think I don't have really an answer to your question. Why is it so important to know who is the greatest of them all, so to say, as this Mishnah seems to be saying?
For me, it really connects back to the beginning of the shiur, in that what is in the mind of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at this point, every moment of his life, is how are we going to manage to preserve Judaism in the diaspora? How are we going to manage to recreate a spiritual center? And it could be that for many, they were almost afraid that they were going to lose. You don't have any prophets anymore. You don't have any temple anymore. And you need to be recording down every single word that is said so that you don't lose it. And you don't have a printing press. So the fact that you have Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, who's that type of a genius, is an incredible thing. In a way, today, I think many people put knowledge over in that sense that, well, if I need the, it's a question that is raised today regarding educators, because educators just a generation ago, they were transferring knowledge that the kids in front of them didn't know. And now you have every kid who has a smartphone in front of them and will have the answers. And it's more, how are they actually transferring it in a way that that knowledge will become something influential for the children. So it's a huge shift in education, and which is happening today. In that same sense, I think that when knowledge, you have Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, who is a Google knowledge base, that has the answer for everything, is an encyclopedia of having every answer. But at the end, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying, you know what? Or Abba Shaul is saying, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if you are a Ma'ayan, if you're able to be connected to the source, then you will have that knowledge, you will learn that knowledge. And in that way, it connects to a midrash that tells us that Avraham Avinu, he was never taught the Torah, so how did he know what to do? He wasn't at Har Sinai, because Har Sinai happened only after Am Yisrael left Egypt. So how did he know how to follow Hashem? And it says that his kidneys were like a ma'ayan, that his kidneys were like a wellspring, which was teaching him the Torah. In other words, if you have a deep sense of connection and being rooted to the source, then that in itself is even more important than the knowledge. So maybe in that sense, that is the message from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai going forward, and saying, make sure that you're connected to everything. It's not only what you know in your mind, it's not what knowledge you have, it's what that knowledge is irrelevant if it's not connected to the source. So I think we've reached the end of our time frame for today. Thank you, Rav Shmuel, for leading us through the Mishnah. And either you can leave us with a sense that competition is something good, and you want to take that forward and be better at something, and say, I want to be the best, which is not a negative thing, as Rav Shmuel was saying. Or you say, you know what, knowledge is not good enough, and I need to find a better and deeper connection to what I am doing. So both options are left for you to take with you till next week. And Laila Tov to everyone, and thank you for joining. And thank you also for your sharing with us during the learning and making it interactive. It's always good to learn from, as we say, Mikol Melamdai Iskalti. We learn from every single one of you as well. We don't only teach, we come here to learn. So thank you for sharing. Laila Tov.
תודה רבה.
לילה טוב.